Bobby Khayam was born May 12, 1973, in Hollywood, Florida, to Iranian immigrants Fred and Farah Khayam. At some point during Bobby's childhood, the family changed their surname from Khayam to Kent after relocating to the U.S. The Kent family was described as a hard-working and close-knit family. Bobby had one older sister named Layla. People describe Bobby as simply a young man growing up in South Florida. As a child, Bobby was intelligent, outgoing, and confident for his age. He participated in activities like surfing, music lessons, and other childhood activities. He was the type of boy who easily made friends and was comfortable with those around him. Around the third grade, Bobby would meet someone. Someone who lived a mere 4 houses down. Someone who would unknowingly become the two-faced figure in his life. His name was Martin Puccio, but known by friends as Marty. The two quickly formed a friendship. Puccio and Bobby attended South Broward High School together, both earning jobs at a Publix in South Florida after they graduated. Puccio and Bobby began to spend enormous amounts of time together one-on-one. The boys' increasingly ruthless behavior began almost as soon as they were getting to know one another. At the Publix grocery store where they both worked, there was an adult male employee who worked as a stocker and was mentally challenged. At the end of his shift, he would sometimes buy groceries and walk home alone, a routine the boys quickly became aware of. They began following him down the street, holding a football and deliberately throwing it at his head, hoping to knock him to the ground. What may have seemed like a cruel game to them was something far darker, a deliberate act of torment directed at someone they viewed as weaker or possibly defenseless. And this was only an early glimpse of the toxic bond forming between them, long before the results of one's behavior would push another into something far more sinister and irreversible. Having shared a passion for weightlifting, they attended the local gym together. Weightlifting became a shared obsession, and rumors spread that the young men had experimented with anabolic steroids to help build their muscles faster. Later on in the investigation, it was reported that both Puccio and Bobby had gotten into physical altercations with other gym members and were known to push others around. According to later testimony and accounts, their friendship at times was volatile. There were allegations that Bobby would physically and emotionally abuse Puccio, leaving him returning home with physical injuries. There were also stories of Bobby humiliating him, controlling him, and physically attacking him. But there is an important complication. Puccio wasn't simply a passive victim throughout his relationship with Bobby. Some accounts of the group also describe Puccio as participating in bullying. And like some of the complications in this case, that contradiction becomes important later. The case eventually became known as the story of a bully being killed by the people he had victimized, but the group of friends surrounding the two were far more complicated than that simple explanation suggests. By early 1993, Puccio was in a romantic relationship with 18-year-old Lisa Connolly. It was not long before Lisa became aware of just how complicated her boyfriend's relationship with Bobby really was. According to Lisa and others who later spoke about the group, Bobby's influence on Puccio was difficult to ignore. The guys had been close friends for years, but their friendship was ruled by frequent arguments, humiliation, intimidation, and physical abuse. Puccio allegedly told Lisa that Bobby had abused him on numerous occasions, sometimes leaving him with visible injuries. For Lisa, hearing these stories changed the way she viewed Bobby. He was seen not simply as Puccio's best friend, but as someone who had an unhealthy amount of control over him. When Lisa became pregnant with Puccio's child, the dynamic between the group of friends became complicated. As her relationship with Puccio became more serious, she increasingly wanted Bobby out of their lives. She thought as long as Bobby remained involved with Puccio, the two of them would never really be able to move forward with their relationship. Lisa reportedly considered finding another girl who could occupy Bobby's attention and keep him away from Puccio. It was an idea that would eventually bring another teenager into the situation. Alice Willis was 17 when she became involved with the group and had a history with law enforcement. She was a former teen prostitute who made at least $150 an hour working for an escort service that catered to men with a pension for underage girls. Bobby had someone new to spend time with, and Puccio could potentially have more distance from him. The relationship between Alice and Bobby quickly deteriorated. Alice later said that Bobby had become abusive toward her, including allegations of rape. Those allegations would become part of the explanation offered for why the group believed Bobby needed to be done away with. Much of what is known about Bobby's behavior comes from the people who participated in his murder, meaning their accounts have to be considered within context. What is clear is that by the summer of 1993, Alice had become deeply opposed to Bobby remaining in their lives, and Lisa felt the same way. Somewhere during this period is when the idea of killing Bobby began to move from being discussed privately into something the group was actually willing to attempt. By this point, Bobby's relationship with Puccio had become increasingly strained, and the people closest to Puccio were being drawn into the conflict. Lisa Connolly was not the only one who had heard Puccio's account of Bobby. Alice had her own encounters with him, and she and Lisa increasingly shared the belief that something needed to change. Their social circle overlapped in several ways. Alice was dating Donald Semenick, a 17-year-old within the same group. Lisa's cousin Derek DeZerko was also present in the orbit of the group, and Heather Swallers became involved as conversations about Bobby continued. At first, the talk centered on separating Bobby and Puccio as well as keep him away from the group. But over time, the tone shifted. The question was no longer how to remove Bobby from their lives. It became whether he should be killed. It was at this point Derek Kaufman entered the situation. Kaufman, 20 years old, had developed a reputation within the group as someone capable of violence. According to the prosecution, he portrayed himself as dangerous and even claimed to have killed before. Whether those claims were true mattered less than the belief that he would help them. The group began turning to him for that reason. They were now discussing vague solutions: where it could happen, how Bobby could be isolated, and how to ensure he could never come back. In the background of Bobby and Puccio's deteriorating friendship, there were also allegations that intensified the hostility between them. One was reported in which Bobby allegedly made a Doberman attack him, an event often cited by those in the group as part of Bobby's aggressive behavior. Another was the claim that Bobby and Puccio met a man at their local gym who agreed to create a sex tape with them. This circulated as gossip within their local circle and further complicated the already volatile dynamic between them. It was reported that Bobby and Puccio would frequent a gay club within South Florida as well. Bobby pressured Puccio into dancing for money and told him they would split the earnings. Puccio became somewhat of a customer favorite, which allowed the young men to make a decent amount of cash each night. When Puccio pleaded with Bobby about not dancing anymore, he threatened to blackmail him, telling all their friends that he was a homosexual. Out of fear and embarrassment, Puccio continued at the club.
Some, gay guy masturbating. Bobby's just staring at yeah, this is cool, we made this, and I'm like, oh, okay, it's time for me to go. And he's like, oh, you don't think this is cool? And I'm like, no, and I'll be outside.
Derek DeZerko recounted that Bobby would often play sexual content off his living room television as entertainment for friends. It was at one of these hangout nights that Bobby played the video he and Puccio recorded with the guy from the gym. DeZerko stated that it made him and others uncomfortable. When the boys approached their acquaintance from the gym a second time, he refused to do another film. As a result of his rejection, he was violently beaten by both Bobby and Puccio. On July 13, 1993, the plan moved into action. After repeated discussions, the group decided to kill Bobby Kent. Lisa had access to a handgun belonging to her mother, and it became part of the plan. They lured Bobby to a remote construction area in western Broward County, far from populated neighborhoods and surrounded by undeveloped land, canals, and work sites where visibility was limited. That isolation was intentional, and Bobby arrived without suspicion. The plan was for Lisa to shoot him, but when the moment came, she couldn't do it. She hesitated, and the opportunity passed. Bobby left the area alive. What should have ended the plan led to further discussion. The group regrouped and analyzed what had gone wrong. Although the attempts had failed, the idea remained. They simply needed another way. Lisa's inability to pull the trigger forced them to reconsider how the killing would be carried out. They began exploring other weapons and methods that would not depend on a single person acting alone. The plan became more direct and more violent. Knives, a baseball bat, and a lead pipe were among the weapons later associated with the attack. Court records later described ongoing discussions about different methods and the decision to proceed with another attempt. The time between the two individual attempts is significant as it shows how this was not a sudden escalation in the middle of a confrontation. They had already tried once. They had left the site. They had time to reconsider. Instead, they returned to the plan. Bobby's death was no longer theatrical. It was being prepared. On the evening of July 14th, Puccio contacted Bobby. That connection was central to the plan, because Bobby trusted him. Puccio had been his closest friend for years, and Bobby truly had no reason to suspect betrayal. Puccio invited him out on normal pretenses, hanging out with their group of friends and getting to spend time alone with Alice. Nothing about this invitation suggested danger. Bobby agreed and got into one of the two vehicles that pulled up that night. The group returned to the same general area as the previous night's attempt, but this time they were prepared. The plan was discussed in detail. They had weapons, they had a method of isolating Bobby, and they had already failed once. By around 11:30 p.m., everyone was at the location. The group was all together and Bobby was there, and the plan was about to be carried out. The attack did not begin immediately. The group initially maintained the appearance of a normal gathering, with Alice spending time with Bobby separately. Heather Swallers later joined them. As part of the plan, they had arranged a signal to determine whether Bobby suspected anything, and Heather was to mention alligators in the conversation, a seemingly harmless topic in South Florida that was meant to test his awareness. Bobby showed no sign of suspicion. And with that, the attack suddenly began when Donald Semenick stabbed Bobby in the neck, turning a simple gathering into complete chaos, which was the plan from the very beginning. Bobby realized he was in danger and tried to flee, but that is when the group closed in on him. According to later testimony, Bobby turned towards Puccio and pleaded for help. In response, he joined in on the assault. Bobby was stabbed repeatedly and beaten as multiple people participated in the attack. And although the exact sequence of every blow varies slightly between accounts, the overall reality is consistent. This was a coordinated group assault on one single unarmed victim who was trying to survive. In the midst of the violence, Puccio ultimately slashed across Bobby's throat twice, and Derek Kaufman struck him in the head with a baseball bat. Bobby suffered catastrophic injuries and died at the scene. They couldn't simply leave Bobby where he had been killed, so they moved his body toward the water face down. Accounts differ regarding exactly who placed his body into the canal. Some have attributed the act to Kaufman and Zerko. Other accounts have described Puccio and Kaufman being the ones. Everyone involved hoped that the remote location and surrounding environment would make the body difficult to find. But it didn't work. For Bobby's family, the first indication that something was seriously wrong came when he failed to come home. Bobby's parents, Fred and Farrah Kent, knew their son well enough to recognize when something was unusual.
Marty Puccio called Bobby's home.
Sorry I missed your call. Please leave a message.
When the phone machine answered, he left an unusual message. Marty said he had gotten home safely and was calling just as Bobby requested.
I called you. You asked me to call you when I got home.
The call woke Mr. Kent, and when he heard the message, he immediately checked to see if Bobby was home. He was not, which was highly unusual.
It was at this stage the family received a strange call from Puccio around 4 a.m. that went to voicemail. Puccio was Bobby's best friend, and under normal circumstances, the two were almost inseparable. But something about this particular phone call immediately struck Fred as strange. Puccio sounded suspicious, and before Fred could properly speak with him or find out where Bobby was, upon calling back, the call abruptly ended. Fred wanted answers. He went directly to Puccio's house and knocked on the door. When Puccio answered, Fred asked him if he had seen Bobby and whether he knew where his son was. Puccio told him he did not know, but Fred was not satisfied with his answer. Lisa Connolly was also there. Fred had never met Lisa before, and her presence only added to the uneasiness. He was looking for his son and wanted to know where Bobby had gone. Instead of receiving a clear explanation, he was essentially told that they did not know where Bobby was and that he should leave. Fred left Puccio's house more suspicious than when he had arrived. The disappearance was no longer something the Kent family could wait out. Fred went home and immediately contacted Broward's sheriff's office, and a missing person report was filed. Bobby was not formally the subject of a long-term missing person search. Rather, police treated his disappearance as a missing person case for just a few days. At the time, however, police were not aware that Bobby had already been murdered. They were still dealing with a missing young man whose family wanted to know where he was, and the people who knew were beginning to panic. In the days following Bobby Kent's murder, the conspiracy began to unravel as several of those involved were questioned by police and soon started confessing to people they trusted.
Do you have any personal knowledge as to what might have happened to Bobby?
I hope he's not. I pray to God he's not dead. Because I don't know how I'd live my life. It'd be very hard for me.
Do you know who had anything to do with Bobby's disappearance?
If I knew, I would tell you.
Lisa Connolly told her mother what had happened, prompting her mom to contact her sister, who was Derek DeZerco's mom. The two women then brought in their brother, Joe Screama. Joe Screama had connections with people in the police department and believed they could determine what to do next. Through Screama, they were put in contact with Broward County Sheriff's Office Detective Frank LaRaza. When LaRaza questioned DeZerco, he confessed to his involvement and provided investigators with information about the killing. About 4 days after the murder, DeZerco led police to Kent's body, which was still at the marshy location where the group had dumped him. There were 2 stab wounds in the back of Bobby's neck. One stab wound penetrated the skin 1 to 2 inches in depth along the side of the backbone. The other stab wound was located in the back of his head, scalp deep. There were 2 superficial stab wounds in the area of Bobby's right shoulder. These wounds did not penetrate more than ½ inch to 1 inch below the skin. Bobby's right abdomen was slashed open. This injury was 2 inches wide at the opening and penetrated his body 6 to 7 inches deep. After passing through the skin and muscle through the front of the abdomen, the wound passed through some attachments of the intestine, through the diaphragm, and then punctured tissues of the lower back. This eventually caused Bobby's intestines to protrude from his body. 2 defensive wounds were located, one on Bobby's right arm and the other on his left hand. There were 2 incised wounds from slicing motions which slit open his neck twice. The upper wound was 4 inches across, while the lower slit was 5 inches across. The voice box or windpipe was severed as a result. This prevented Bobby from speaking and causing bleeding into the windpipe, which obstructed his ability to bring air in and out of his lungs. Bobby's neck was fractured just inside the cut throat area. 2 bones were fractured in the vertebrae column behind the trachea by a force which caused the head to move backwards. Bobby was also stabbed in the left chest. The wound was 2 inches across and penetrated 6 to 7 inches into his chest. The knife penetrated 3 of his 4 heart chambers, continuing through a lung and puncturing tissue between the ribs and the back of the chest. There was a 2-inch long laceration of Bobby's right scalp. This injury was inflicted by a blunt object, and the skull was not fractured. LaRaza later recalled that the body was already decomposing when they arrived. Once police had the body and DeZerco's account, investigators had a major breakthrough. DeZerco's confession gave them information about who was involved and how the killing had been carried out. Police subsequently began arresting the participants. Derek DeZerco was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, along with Derek Kaufman, Lisa Connolly, and Donald Semenuk. Semenuk was brought back to Broward County from Brevard County. As the case against the young adults began to develop, Marty Puccio remained silent. As Bobby's closest friend, he had helped lure him to his death. And yet, while Bobby's family desperately searched for him, Puccio continued to play the part of the concerned friend. In reality, he was one of the last people to know the truth, and he was deliberately silent. Puccio had already spoken with Bobby's dad, Fred Kent, after the murder, claiming Bobby had left the previous night with an unknown girl. On the morning of July 20th, 1993, Puccio surrendered at the Broward County Public Safety Building, accompanied by a private investigator. He was then charged with first-degree murder. By the time the murder of Bobby Kent reached the courtroom, the conspiracy that had seemed so impenetrable only weeks earlier had begun collapsing under the weight of its own secrets. 7 young people had participated in the plot in different ways, and the prosecutors ultimately pursued each defendant separately. What emerged during the 1995 court trial was not a simple story of 7 equal participants. Some had helped lure Bobby to his death, some had physically attacked him, and others became witness for the prosecution. Those distinctions would eventually determine who walked free after only a few years and who remained behind bars for life. The prosecution's case established that the murder had been preceded by planning rather than erupting spontaneously. Lisa Connolly and Alice Willis were among the earliest figures involved in the conspiracy. Connolly was Puccio's girlfriend and was pregnant with his child. Willis had previously been Bobby's girlfriend. The two discussed killing Bobby and enlisted Derek Kaufman, who presented himself as someone capable of arranging a killing. Puccio and others testified that Bobby had subjected him to years of physical abuse and intimidation. The evidence also showed that Puccio had been armed before the attack and personally inflicted wounds upon Bobby. Defense witnesses described the effects that the relationship had on Puccio, while the prosecution argued that whatever grievances present could not justify transforming a planned killing into an act of legitimate self-defense or retaliation. After a 2.5-hour time frame of deliberation, Puccio was convicted of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. Judge Charles Green considered the recommendation by the jury of the death sentence for Puccio. The proposal was granted after a vote of 8-4. Puccio's lawyers challenged his punishment before the Florida Supreme Court. The central problem was proportionality. The court concluded that the record did not establish that Puccio was sufficiently more culpable than his co-defendants to justify executing him when there were other participants who played substantial roles in the killing. The court specifically considered the roles played by Semenuk and Kaufman, and rejected the proposition that Puccio's conduct made him uniquely deserving death. Kaufman occupied a very different position in the conspiracy. He was not Bobby's childhood friend, and he had no long-standing personal relationship with him. He entered the plot as the person others believed could help arrange Bobby's murder. Kaufman suggested the isolated location where the killing could take place and became an active participant in the attack. The evidence established that he helped pursue Bobby when he attempted to escape and ultimately struck him with the baseball bat. His role was sufficiently substantial that a jury convicted him of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit first-degree murder. Kaufman received imprisonment plus 30 years of the conspiracy conviction. Unlike several of the other defendants, he did not receive a short sentence in exchange for cooperation. Donald Semenuk was the person who initiated the attack. During the planning, he indicated that he would make the first move, and ultimately approached Bobby from behind and stabbed him in the neck. After Bobby attempted to escape, Semenuk helped Puccio and Kaufman catch him and remained involved as the attack continued. Puccio came armed with a knife and a pipe. Despite the role that Semenuk played, he was convicted of second-degree murder rather than first-degree murder, along with conspiracy. The court sentenced him to life imprisonment. His appeal challenged aspects of the sentencing, but Florida 4th District Court of Appeal ultimately upheld the sentence, emphasizing the brutality of his participation and the fact that he had initiated the attack with the first stab wound and all on his 18th birthday. Alice Willis' conviction was more complicated. She had been Bobby's former girlfriend and was one of the people involved in the earliest discussions about killing him. She helped lure Bobby to the murder site by exploiting his belief that they might resume their relationship. But when the physical attack began, the evidence indicated that Willis did not inflict the wounds that killed Bobby. She was nevertheless convicted of second-degree murder and conspiracy, originally receiving a 40-year prison sentence, followed by a lengthy period of probation. Her sentence was later reduced on appeal. She ultimately served less than 8 years and was released from prison in September of 2001, remaining subject to extensive supervision.
Very shattering to her.
Okay.
So, are you prepared to hear what she has to say?
Yes.
You prepared to say it?
Yes.
Okay. Alex, you're on.
When I was in high school, I was friends with several people. I had a boyfriend that abused me extremely bad. Well, there was supposed to be a fight and he was supposed to get beat up. He ultimately got murdered right in front of me. everybody went to prison. I went for 8 years on a 40-year prison sentence.
Okay. Did you have anything to do with him being murdered, or it was just because you were there?
The majority because I was there to watch a fight and it turned into a murder.
Let's be a little clearer, Alice.
Because of the abuse I had suffered from him.
Physically?
Yes.
Okay.
The boys were supposed to beat him up, and it turned into more than just beating him up.
Did you hire the boys to
No.
have them beat
One
up?
was his best friend of 15 years. There was actually more to that I didn't even know of happened between the two of them until after I was arrested to why they did what they did.
But
that ultimately had nothing to do with me, that part.
There are two parts, I think, that are important, though. You helped get him to that location.
Yes.
Let's be fair.
Yes.
You got him there.
Yes, I've always taken that responsibility.
People would say you lured him there.
I've always been there, yes.
And then once it happened, then she was threatened with her life if she were to say anything to anybody. And you should also own the piece where you were the one that did speak up.
Yes, I did. I'm the one that went to the police and
after
basically got the whole investigation rolling.
After he was murdered?
So it was messy, complicated, and with the trauma history and all.
Well, it was out in the wilderness. There was no cell phones at the time either. And it was at a wilderness lake area. It was totally undeveloped. And as far as the part for when it happened, I was in it because I had heard from my friend that her boyfriend was basically fed up with his bullying and abuse and the stuff that they were doing together, and he just couldn't take it anymore, so he was going to fight him. And I figured after what he put me through, I'd like to see him get his butt beat after being through it, so that's why I was there.
Was he still your boyfriend?
No.
Oh, so you had already broke up, and
yes,
you knew, okay.
we had already broken up.
Okay. No, I did not expect you to say that. But I still stand by you. I know you as a person. And I won't leave.
Years later, Willis resurfaced publicly in connection with the anniversary of Bobby's murder. Her willingness to discuss the case gave the public a rare glimpse into how one of the participants remembered the conspiracy and the years that followed. Lisa Connolly's position in the conspiracy was particularly significant because she and Willis were among the people who initially wanted Bobby dead. Connolly was also Puccio's girlfriend and was pregnant with his baby while the case was unfolding. She was convicted of second-degree murder and conspiracy to commit aggravated battery with a deadly weapon. The trial judge imposed life imprisonment plus 5 years, treating the circumstances as sufficiently serious to justify departing upward from the normal sentencing guidelines. In 1997, Connolly appealed her conviction, and the Florida 4th District Court ruled that the reasons used to justify the extraordinary sentence were legally inadequate. The court rejected the idea that a supposed breach of trust between Connolly and Bobby justified the departure, rejected the use of her post-crime concealment as a basis for increasing the sentence, and concluded that the extreme brutality of the other participants could not simply be attributed to Connolly when she had not physically inflicted those injuries. Her conviction remained intact, but her sentence was sent back for resentencing with the applicable guidelines. Her eventual sentence was reduced, and Connolly was released in February 2004, after serving approximately 11 years.
No, it wasn't his, because they were saying she slept with both of them. And I asked her to be really honest with me, and she said no. She never slept with Bobby Kent.
While incarcerated, Connolly gave birth to her daughter that she and Puccio had conceived before their arrests. There's reports that allege that the child is not Puccio's, but Bobby's. In an interview, DeZerko explained how he asked her specifically if the child was Bobby's. Connolly has confidently denied that the child is Bobby's. Derek DeZerko became one of the most consequential witnesses in the entire case. His decision to cooperate helped expose the murder itself. He did not deliver the physical blows that killed Bobby. Instead, he became a cooperating participant after the crime and ultimately led Detective Larazzo to the body. His information helped investigators establish what had occurred and identify other participants. DeZerko pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and conspiracy and received concurrent sentences totaling 11 years. He served less than 5 and was released in October of 1999. His cooperation illustrated one of the most striking aspects of the case. The person whose confession helped bring the conspiracy down ultimately served a dramatically shorter sentence than the man who had physically attacked Bobby. This brings us to our final conspirator, Heather Swallers. Heather Swallers was the final and yet another participant whose role was different from Puccio's, Kaufman, and Semenuk's. She participated in the planning and went with the group to the murder site, but she did not inflict the wounds that killed Bobby. She later cooperated with investigators and testified against other participants. She indicated that during the fatal assault on Bobby, she ran and hid in the back of the car she rode in. Swallers pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and conspiracy, receiving a 7-year sentence in February 1998, after serving less than 3 years. Her cooperation, like DeZerko, is why her sentence was lesser than the other participants involved in the conspiracy. Bobby's parents continued to live with the consequences long after the courtroom proceedings ended.
You trusted Marty?
Okay. Of course, they had dinner that night together, and then they went out. Marty picked him up. Marty would never have gone. Bobby would never have gone if they weren't the best of friends.
Does that make it harder, the fact that...
I think so. Because it's like...
Bobby's sister Layla Kent is adamant to this day that his behavior described by the group is not the type of person that he ever was. For them, there was no sentence, appeal, or release date that could undo what happened. The legal systems could determine how long the killers would remain imprisoned, but it could not restore the son who had been taken from them. After the trials ended, the murder did not disappear. In 1997, journalist Jim Schutza published Bully, a true story of high school revenge, bringing the case to a national audience.
These weren't kids from broken homes. These were kids from middle-class homes in Hollywood, Florida. These weren't kids who you would normally think would get involved in something like this. So to me, what was fascinating was the dichotomy. And to me, what was fascinating was I could see why they would want to kill this guy. And then I couldn't understand why they did. And I thought if I could convey that in a motion picture, you'd have something pretty special.
4 years later, director Larry Clark adapted the story into a controversial 2001 film titled Bully. The film dramatized the murder and trials and featured Brad Renfro as Puccio, Nick Stahl as Kent, Bijou Phillips as Alice Willis, Rachel Miner as Lisa Connolly, Michael Pitt as Donald Semenuk, Kelly Garner as Heather Swallers, Daniel Frances as Derek DeZerko, and Leo Fitzpatrick as Derek Kaufman. The case was also the focus of a full-length episode on a crime show called Forensic Files. Detective Frank Larazzo later described the investigation as the most shocking case of his career, emphasizing how intimate and personal the violence had been. Recent 2026 reportings continue to identify Puccio, Kaufman, and Semenuk as the 3 members of the Broward 7 still imprisoned, while the other 4 are no longer incarcerated. And that is ultimately where the Bobby Kent case ends. Not with a single courtroom verdict, but with 7 separate lives permanently altered by the same night. 3 are behind prison walls and 4 returned to civilization. Something Bobby Kent never got the chance to do again. The worst part about the case has to be the element of trust. It's a conspiracy that rested upon it. Bobby trusted friends who were already planning his final moments. And perhaps that is the darkest part of Bobby Kent's murder. The murder lasted minutes, but the consequences have lasted for decades.